Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox. Paul Bunyan was a giant lumberjack. He stood 63 axes handles high, give or take a handle. When Paul shouted, "Timber!" and swung his axe, 100 trees would fall. Back in Paul's day, America was growing fast, and people needed wood to build houses and towns. Farmers needed wild land cleared so they could grow crops. Paul showed an early talent for knocking down trees. As a baby, he rolled over in his sleep one night and knocked down a mile of Maine forest. He always knew he'd be a lumberjack, and soon it was time to follow his dream. "I'm off to log the North Woods," he told his parents. "Good luck, son," they said. "Watch where you step." Paul got a job at a logging camp. Chopping down trees was easy, but he wished he had someone to help him haul the logs to the river. Then came the winter of the blue snow. Beautiful blue snow fell for days. Paul came across a snowdrift as big as a house with two hairy blue ears sticking out of it. "Moo!" it softly bellowed. Paul lifted these ears, and out came sickly baby ox that had been stuck in the snow. The ox was blue all over from the cold. Paul brought the ox back to camp and cared for him all night. In the morning, the ox was feeling better, but he stayed blue. He licked Paul on the neck. Paul laughed. "I'll call you Babe," he said. Then they went off to Michigan, where Paul set up his own logging camp. Babe grew like crazy and soon was so big that folks could hardly see him end to end. None of the local watering holes were big enough for Babe to drink from. Paul solved that problem by using his axe to dig the Great Lakes. Paul's logging camp was filled with hundreds of lumberjacks. They were a hungry bunch, and their favorite food was pancakes. More pancakes, they called, but the cooks couldn't make enough. Sourdough Sam, the chef cook, feared that men would quit if they didn't get more pancakes. "Don't worry, Sam. I'll solve this," Paul said. Paul sat and thought about the problem a while. Then he and Babe disappeared. About a week later, Babe returned to camp pulling an iron griddle. That griddle was a mile wide, if any inch. Paul had it built in the big city. When Sam saw the griddle, his eyes nearly popped out of his head. "Now we're cooking," he cried. Paul ordered a fire, built the griddle, Babe eager to help drink all the water out the lake. The cooks used the empty lake bed as a bowl to mix the batter in. Men strapped slabs of bacon onto their boots and skated around the griddle. When it was all greased up, the cooks poured their batter. Soon 500,000 pancakes were bubbling on the griddle. There were even a pipeline of syrup going straight to the tables. The lumberjacks were finally happy and no one ever quit Paul's camp. The pancakes were good too. While logging was done in one spot, Paul simply lifted the camp into wheels and Babe pulled it to a new place. One time, they set down their camp next to a twisty river in Wisconsin. The river was so crooked that the logs the lumberjacks sent floating down would end up in an awful jam. For weeks at a time, the sawmills downriver were waiting for logs that never came. Paul set down his teeth and sat picking his teeth with pine trees while he thought about the problem. Paul had his blacksmith, forge a giant chain. He hooked one end of the chain to Babe's harness and the other end to twist in the river. "Pull, Babe," he commanded, and Babe pulled. Sweat poured off Babe, but the river wouldn't budge. "Harder," Paul said. Babe grunted and pulled harder. The muscles on his neck stood out the tree roots. His legs dug the earth and his belly nearly touched the ground, but the old river was crooked as ever. Then Paul saw the bend in the river and gave a shiver. "It's working," he cried. Babe let out a bellow that was heard all the way to Kansas. He gave a mighty tug, causing the river to snap like a whip. Then crack, it lay straight as a flagpole. Everyone cheered. Paul stuck out his chest with pride, so much that his buttons popped off his shirt. Paul and Babe went on to do many more great things. They were last seen working in the vast wilderness of Alaska. Folks up there say they still sometimes hear a mighty voice in the woods calling out, "Timber!"